What is one's purpose in life? This question comes up so often. Many people are searching for a sense of purpose. But this word purpose, it would seem, has gotten contaminated with so many misleading ideas and connotations, or maybe it's just the way in which we tend to interpret it from our own egocentric perspective. And I think that for a lot of people, we have this overwhelming sense that something is missing in our lives. And so what we're really after is something to fill that void in us, something to satiate our sense of dissatisfaction with life, or to give us a feeling of worth or value or importance perhaps, something to make us feel better about ourselves in some way. And to some degree, this idea of having a purpose is really about me and what I might get out of it, which, if you think about it, is a little bit selfish or self-centered perhaps, or self-serving, whatever word seems to fit best. The point being that we're trying to find something to create a sense of importance or fulfillment or validation in ourselves in order to alleviate some feeling of deficiency. And don't misunderstand me. I don't mean to sound as if I'm being condemning of anyone or discouraging or anything of that sort. That's really not my intention here. I think that it's quite natural and understandable that we're looking for this sort of thing, this sense of fulfillment, that we're looking for something to give our life value, something to make our lives more meaningful, something to make our lives feel more worthy of living. All of that is quite understandable. And I've been there myself many times, so I'm certainly not in any position to condemn, nor do I really think that it's worthy of condemnation. I think it's quite innocent, but also perhaps a bit misdirected. But when we really look at it, it is in many ways very much about me and what I feel is missing in my life, and what can I do that will fulfill that sense of something missing. And I wonder if we can shift our attention away from ourselves to something else. I wonder if we can completely turn it in the other direction. What I have found to be a much more useful question, rather than asking, what is my purpose, is to ask, what is life calling forth from within me? And you might think of Jesus praying in the Garden of Gethsemane when he said, "Not my will be done, but yours," which is another way of saying, rather than what I want, what does life want from me? What can I do for someone else? What can I do for the world? What can I contribute? How can I be of service? Because in this way, it's not about what I can get, but what can I give? It's not about serving oneself, but being of service to someone else. And it's not even the sort of question that requires a great deal of thinking and pondering and calculating. It's really a question of attention and listening, because there are often situations all around us that are provoking something within us to respond in some way. The question is, in what way? Many people, when they look out into the world, remark on how there's so many problems, so much unnecessary suffering, so much hatred, division, injustice, hunger, poverty, environmental devastation, and so on. And they often ask, why doesn't someone do something about it? And they will often go on complaining endlessly about all these things, but never stop to consider that perhaps they are someone. And perhaps that disturbance in you is calling you to take some kind of action. But for whatever the reason, you're ignoring the call, or maybe it just hasn't dawned on you yet that life or the universe or God, if you prefer to think of it in that way, is calling you to serve in some way. So for example, if we find ourselves disturbed by some situation, what is that disturbance in us? What's behind it? Can we look at it? If I see a homeless person sitting on the street, I feel disturbed by that. There's a feeling in me which is unsettling and uncomfortable. And if I'm like most people, I'll try to get away from that feeling. I'll try to avert my eyes or to think about something else, or I might look down at my phone and try to distract myself. Anything to get away from that unsettling feeling. But what if instead I simply allow that feeling to move through me, to direct me in some way? What is it that I'm really feeling? What is that feeling asking of me? Can we go into that and look at it? I think most people will find, if they look more deeply into this, that beneath that initial feeling of discomfort, there is something else. And what that usually is something like compassion. Think about it. If you didn't have compassion, why else would it disturb you? If you didn't have compassion, you just wouldn't care at all. You wouldn't even think about it. If you didn't have compassion, you could stare that person right in the eyes and not feel a thing. Now I know some people might say, well, I just don't like seeing lazy people sitting around doing nothing and expecting others to take care of them, or something of that sort. Maybe they say that homeless people are disgusting and filthy, and that's what they find so disturbing. And there may be many other reasons why a person has this particular attitude. But I think that someplace deep down, in part, it's just a cop-out. It's a kind of denial, a way of denying our own impulse to help. I think that it's just a way of repressing our empathy, because it's really our empathy which disturbs us, that pulls at us to do something. And some people have really mastered this kind of desensitization, which is why they tend to be so bitter and miserable, because they've essentially cut themselves off from their own innate compassion. But if your heart is still open, even just a bit, perhaps you might see that what is being stirred up in you is compassion and the compulsion to act upon it, to respond to this situation. So there's this impulse in us to respond, to try and relieve the person's suffering in some way, to help them in some way, to comfort them or to feed them or something of that sort. Or at the very least to acknowledge them as a fellow human being and to acknowledge their suffering. And this is what I'm really getting at, that there is something being called forth from within us, and that all we need to do is listen. We don't have to go on overthinking it, analyzing our lives, trying to formulate some elaborate plan, or looking at how other people may be living their purpose and then trying to mimic that in some way, or to devise our own version of it. All we have to do is just listen to what is being called forth from within us at any given moment. And it may change from moment to moment according to the situation, according to what we see going on in the world around us. Now, sometimes the issue is that we see so many problems in the world. There are so many problems that need to be addressed, and it can be quite overwhelming because after all, you're just one person and there's really only so much you can do. Sometimes we can feel so overwhelmed by all of it that we become totally immobilized. We wind up not doing anything at all. But it's not the responsibility of any one individual to fix the entire world. It's all of our responsibility collectively, and for each of us individually, we do what we can with whatever is available to us in regard to whatever is within our capacity and our reach. You don't really have to go out of your way. It doesn't have to be something big. Now, of course, it could be something big. It could be that you feel inspired to start some sort of movement or a non-profit organization to address some specific problem that you see in the world. Or maybe you feel inspired to start a community garden, or perhaps an intentional community of some sort. There can be all sorts of things that one might feel inspired to work toward in the service of some cause, and I certainly don't want to discourage anyone from doing that. But I'm also saying that it may just be that you don't have that particular aspiration, or maybe you don't have the means or the time to do something on that large of a scale. And that's okay too. You can just work within your means, work within your schedule, work with whatever tools you already have available to you. to just work from where you are with whatever happens to show up in the moment. And there's an old saying that if everyone would just sweep outside of their own home, the whole street would be clean. So we don't need to try and fix all the problems in the world all at once. No one should have to take that kind of burden upon themselves. And in truth, you wouldn't be able to. It's not possible without the consent and cooperation of so many others. And rather than overwhelm yourself with all those things which are perhaps beyond your reach or beyond your control, beyond your ability to address and to resolve, just look at what is right in front of you. Just look at your immediate surroundings. And especially if you see anything which disturbs you, you might simply inquire as to what is being called forth from within you. And sometimes it just means working on our own personal relationships with our partner, with our family and friends, the way that we engage with others at work or out in the world when we're going about our day. Just being kind to others, just being helpful, just being more understanding, more patient, more forgiving, more friendly. It may just mean engaging in small random acts of kindness whenever the opportunity arises all on its own. When you see that homeless person sitting on the street, when you see someone with their hands full trying to open a door, when the person at the grocery store checkout is short on money to pay for their food, and when you see someone who seems to be overwhelmed or disheartened or exhausted or frustrated or sad, and just to see if you feel compelled to offer something in that moment, a kind word, a helping hand, whatever it may be. Too often we have the idea that our calling needs to be one very specific thing. But maybe it's not about what we do specifically and more about the spirit in which we do it. Maybe it's just in the way in which we live our lives day to day, with the intention to be of service, to help, to assist, to uplift, and to inspire, in whatever way it happens to be at any given moment. Even when we look out into the greater world and we find ourselves disturbed by so many things, we can ask, what is it that I would rather see, and in what way can I at least contribute to that vision? Even if it's very small, even if it's just within our immediate circle of friends and family and other close associates. In what way can I be an embodiment of that which I wish to see more of in the world? If I think, for example, that there's too much hatred, what that really means is that there's not enough love and compassion and understanding. And so in what way can I bring more love and compassion and understanding into the world? Just in the way that I engage with others, just in my ordinary everyday interactions. If I see that there are people who are hungry or sleeping out in the cold, is it within my capacity to feed them? Is it within my capacity to offer them shelter, or at the very least to offer them a blanket or a coat to keep them warm? If I see that there are people who are suffering in any way, or need some kind of assistance or encouragement or comfort, in what way might I attend to that? Or it may be that one feels called to serve in some other way entirely, by simply expressing and sharing some creative passion, inspiring others through music or painting or some other artistic medium. Or there may be the inspiration to create some practical product, something that others may need or find useful in their daily lives, or to create some ethical or environmentally friendly alternative to some existing product or service. And again, not that we have to try and take on so many things, or that we have to go out of our way looking for problems to solve. Even if we just give our attention to one thing and really engage with that with sincere devotion to service, with the sincere intention to help or to uplift or to inspire others, we can make so much difference in the lives of others and in the world. And who knows who else might see that and be inspired to take part in some way or to serve in some other way altogether. However we answer to that call, it's going to look different from one person to the next. But if we all do our part, it makes all the difference. And what's interesting in all of this is that when we shift our aim from trying to find something to fulfill us, to fill that void in us, to make us feel valuable or what have you, when we shift from that self-serving self-interest to serving others in some way, we actually become fulfilled by that. When we let go of the need to be fulfilled and we just become engaged in selfless service, just to be fully engaged in doing whatever we feel moved to do in the service of others, or to be engaged in some creative expression, without even thinking about it, we find ourselves feeling fulfilled by that. And as I said before, we don't have to give this a lot of thought. We don't have to try and figure anything out. We just have to pay attention. To just pay attention to what is right in front of us, and more importantly to our own feelings. To notice when something is being called forth from within us. To make space for that to arise in us. To allow it to move through us, and to allow it to move us. To direct our words and our actions. In some sense, what we're doing is putting aside that sense of self-importance, putting aside our own desires and aspirations for the moment, putting aside our own need to be validated or admired and all that sort of thing, and becoming empty of all of that in order to make space for spirit or God or inspiration or compassion or however you prefer to think of it, to make space for that to operate through you so that you merely become the instrument. And in terms of feeling unfulfilled, we allow that to fill us. And it's not about satisfying our desire to be fulfilled. So long as we're operating from that mindset, we're just thinking about ourselves and we go on missing it. We never find fulfillment because we're too busy thinking of ourselves. It's only when we open ourselves up to be receptive to that calling deep within us, in whatever way it wants to be expressed, not in the way that we try to imagine it or to impose some idea of what it should look like according to what we see others doing or according to what might bring about the admiration of others or fame or fortune or validation. But when we put aside all that self-interest and just listen to that calling and just allow that to work through us without interference, without evaluating it as to whether it's admirable or whether it's profitable or whether it's enough, and not being attached to the result of our actions, which is to say not seeking to be rewarded in any way, whether through material means or through praise, or whether people will even be receptive to our assistance, because sometimes they will refuse it, but just to do what must be done simply for the sake of doing it. Just to do what is right simply because it is right. Just to do what is kind simply for the sake of kindness, and so on. And that's when life becomes fulfilling and meaningful, when we step out of the way and let that inspiration guide our actions, to simply be a portal through which compassion can move through us and out into the world. And when we come into that space, or rather, when we make space for that to come into us and to move through us, there's no longer this question of purpose, because you're living in it. If you find value in this content, be sure to like, share, and subscribe.